Hello everyone, you are watching NBC Ethiopia TV. Today we have a guest here. His name is Mr. Ultimatum Green. He is a poet and a teacher. In our today's show, we're going to talk about the European intervention and also the current Western media influence in Ethiopia. If you are with us, he will also share his personal life experiences. So stay tuned up to the end of our program. Welcome to the show, my guest.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about yourself. Who is Ultimatum?
Well, Ultimatum is my poetic persona. Timothy. My name is Timothy. I was born Timothy Green in Warren, Ohio. And but when I started to perform my poetry, I took the name Timothy. That was in Los Angeles some years later. So Timothy, the poet MC, that's just how I introduced myself to Ethiopia as a poet and an MC. But I'm also a writer. And as you mentioned, a teacher. I do a lot of other things too, voiceover narration. So I've tried to bring all of my skills here into Ethiopia to share and to teach, just to be part of the Ethiopian society.
How long did you stay here in Ethiopia?
I actually came the millennium. The year is your year 2000, 2007, our year just before the new year. I arrived in Ethiopia September 7th, 2007, which was just before the new year. Year 2000 here in Ethiopia. So I've been here since that time. I went back once to change my visa from tourist to business because I wanted to make it known that I would be here working with Ethiopia. So
where did you born?
I was born in Warren, Ohio, which is just south of Cleveland, just east of Akron, Ohio. A lot of people know Akron because that's where LeBron James was born. So I was in that area of Ohio. That's where I was born. And then after college, I moved to Los Angeles.
What was your best time and place here in Ethiopia?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, just being here in Ethiopia, to me, has been the fulfillment of a dream. But one of the events that stands out in my mind, probably when I was working with Sidney Salmon and the Imperial Majestic Band. We went to Jimma for a show. And the week before, they came to the club we were playing at in Addis, and they filmed a promo for the show we'd be doing in Jimma. So where we say, you know, coming down to Jimma, ladies and gentlemen, look for Sidney Salmon Imperial Majestic Band. But when we got there, I was not prepared for the amount of people. Like the stadium was full. And this was in the afternoon when we were just arriving. And we hadn't been to the hotel, but they said, let's go to the stadium and you're going to do a sound check. And when we got to the stadium, it was full and people were holding up signs of welcome and they were playing on the big screen that coming to Jimma promo that we did the week before. I had never seen it before. I just remember the night that they came into the club, they filmed it, and then they left. And so they were playing that on that big screen like all week. So people knew who I was, they knew who Sidney and the Majestic Band were before we came. It was just like so much excitement. I mean, that was the first time I really felt like a big celebrity in Ethiopia. The people of Jimma really welcomed us. They were so nice. They were so kind. It was an amazing experience. And that was my first time outside of Addis. I mean, I'd been to Shashamani and Adama, Awassa, but that was my first time in another place in Ethiopia. So it was really memorable experience.
Interesting. As you know, it's hard to adapt a new culture when you go to somewhere. Do you accustom yourself with our culture?
Yeah, well, Ethiopia for us, even when I lived in Los Angeles, we ate Ethiopian food. We drank tej. You know, we immersed ourselves in Ethiopian culture, art. I was baptized in Los Angeles at Tekla Haymanot Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Watts. So, I mean, we immersed ourselves in Ethiopian culture. We always viewed that we would come to Ethiopia one day. So, you know, basic phrases in Amharic and things like that we learned before we came to Ethiopia. So it wasn't, I mean, you know, there's always a cultural adjustment when you go to a new country, but still, you know, some of the things we were already prepared for. So it wasn't a big thing. Like I had eaten injera since 1984. So before I came to Ethiopia, we'd eaten injera, lots of different Ethiopian foods. So not only in Los Angeles, but also in DC and London, in Canada. I'd been to Ethiopian restaurants all over. So it wasn't anything new.
You have been here almost for the last 15 years. So
yes, sir.
How do you describe Ethiopia?
I love Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the place that I always wanted to be. As we say in one of our songs, Ethiopia is the land where our God loves to be. So we want to be close to God, and we felt like Ethiopia was the place to be. For years, like I said, when I was in Los Angeles, I was part of an organizing group that was committed to repatriation, coming to Ethiopia. So to me, that was always in the forefront of my mind, was coming to Ethiopia. One day, I would come and live in Ethiopia.
I saw you a lot of times when you talk about Adwa on the stages.
Yes, yes.
How do you describe a great African victory, Adwa?
Adwa, for us, especially African Americans, was a seminal event because, first of all, it was one of the first newsworthy items that came out of Africa. You know, you have to put it in perspective. In the late 1800s, that was not even 20 years after African Americans had been emancipated from slavery. You know, in the 1890s, it was less than 30 years. So to see this news of an African kingdom repelling a European invader was inspiring. It was a connection from the Ethiopianism that was primarily historical and biblical to an actual situation on the ground in modern times. Poets wrote things about it. There was articles about it. So it was something that was very important to not just Africans in America, but Africans all over the world.
As you know, Ethiopia will stand alone when she fights during Adwa with the Italian troops. What about now? Do you see any similarities with the current situation?
I see some of the similarities with the second Italian invasion during Haile Selassie's time, because many African Americans and Jamaicans and people wanted to come and fight for Ethiopia, because again, this feeling had been built up and this connection with Ethiopia had been built up since Adwa. So when we saw a repeat of the same thing happening again with Mussolini, many Africans of the diaspora wanted to come and fight for Ethiopia, but our governments forbid it. U.S. government, British government, forbid Africans from coming and fight what they termed a foreign war. But we termed it as it was, you know, our people. So that was one of the things that made us realize that the world seemed to be against Ethiopia. And so this current situation seems very similar to that because, again, on the grassroots level, a lot of people are supporting Ethiopia, but with what's being said on the media, it gives a different picture. Some people don't realize that they could help because they think it's already a done deal. So, you know, that's some of the things like Colonel John Robinson came to Ethiopia and was a pilot, like contributed to Ethiopia's Air Force. They didn't have an Air Force until Colonel Robinson came. So things like that, we want to contribute. And he didn't wait for the U.S. Since he had a plane, he was able to come on his own. But a lot of African Americans were not able to come to Ethiopia. But many, again, from Barbados, from Antigua, from Guinea, Guyana, a lot of African Americans, people from the Americas, came to Ethiopia after Adwa and before around the time of Haile Selassie's coronation, because they wanted to be a part of building, helping develop Ethiopia. So, I mean, we've always had that connection. It's not anything new.
How do you see the international media coverage about Africa and also about Ethiopia?
Yeah, well, it's always been biased. What we seek is more balance. It's been biased for many years. Again, like when I was growing up, we never saw any positive news about Africa. It was only wars, famines, disasters. Anytime something like that happens, you see it right away. But the good things that happen on a daily basis it's not broadcast. And so that imbalance is what we're aware of. We see that it's not a balanced presentation. It's just one side. And so what we would like to see is more balanced presentation internationally. Also here in Ethiopia, we would like to see that more balance. That's all.
Regarding with this, the U.S. Embassy and also plus the Western media keep saying like Addis is under the siege.
I know.
Yeah, what is the reality on the ground? Because you are here.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, again, and you're here too, so we don't see anything like that. Like, planes take off every day. I go to work. It's still, you know, taxis are running. It's not a siege situation like how it's been presented, like, oh, the armies are just outside of Addis Ababa, they're ready to enter. And, you know, the perspective, like some of my family and friends from US have sent me emails and, are you okay? I'm fine. We're fine. Yeah. You know, my life has not been disrupted significantly at all. I haven't seen any difference since they were reporting this. Even at that time, I didn't see any difference. I didn't hear any shells bursting or artillery. We're not at all. It's only when we watch on TV that we see some of these things.
The Westerns are trying to interfere in our own issue here in Ethiopia. How do you describe that?
Yeah, again, that's nothing new. A wise man once said that if Africa wasn't so desirable, then these people wouldn't want to be here. So obviously there's things about Africa that they want. And, you know, it's been an age-old strategy of divide and rule, divide and conquer. So that's not, again, that's not a new strategy by Western forces in Africa. They've always used conflicts between regions or religions or tribes to exacerbate those things from outside to make it seem like these issues are larger than our greater issues of which is African development and unity. To me, that's the accepted goal, is unity. But when you have forces, outside forces, like Bob Marley said in the song, they bribing with guns, spare parts, and money. So a lot of people take those bribes and they go off on a tangent, and it results in fratricide, brothers killing brothers. You know, when brothers fight each other, somebody from outside is going to take the inheritance. So we have to understand that these conflicts are engineered from outside of our reality, but they take advantage of, I'm not saying that there aren't real differences, but there are real things that unite us more than divide us. So I think that we should be focusing on what unites us, not on what divides us, because anytime you focus on what divides us, those things become larger. But when you focus on what unites us, that's what becomes larger. You know, you're able to put the differences aside, because there are differences. I'm not saying there aren't differences, but those differences shouldn't be to the point where we kill each other over them. That's not, to me, that's not necessary. But we have that in African America, in Jamaica, and all over the world. Black people are pitted against each other. So we have to ask ourselves why. What is the advantage? It's not to our advantage. We're killing each other. So it must be to someone else's advantage. And that's what we have to look at to see, okay, we have to thwart these machinations, these strategies to try to divide us and overcome our differences and unite. That to me is the best solution for all of us, not just here on the continent, but also in the diaspora.
When you were saying about the Ethiopianism before, there are a lot of misunderstood concepts about Ethiopianism. What it really means by Ethiopianism?
Ethiopianism was what Pan-Africanism was called before the term Pan-Africanism became popular. Ethiopianism was that historical, ancestral, biblical connection with the continent of Africa, which we term the whole continent as Ethiopia. So Ethiopianism was that, it was a cultural, historical, it was everything that Pan-Africanism was Ethiopianism back in those days. Ethiopianism was the popular term, and religious, because there were churches that were founded. You have to remember that a lot of Africans in the Americas were given Christianity from their slave masters. But many of those who accepted Christ decided to look into it deeper And when they became familiar with how many times Ethiopia was mentioned in the Bible, how historical and prophetic Ethiopia was still yet to play a part on the stage of world affairs. So that all coalesced into a philosophy called Ethiopianism. It was religious, it was historical, it was cultural, it was all of these things. It was just a way that people in the diaspora could connect with the continent, which again, we saw the whole continent as being Ethiopia. So that's where the original term came from. The term Ethiopianism kind of lost after World War II, and they had a series of Pan-African conferences in the 20s and in the 30s and after World War II, that the word Pan-Africanism became the accepted term for this same idea, historical, spiritual, ancestral connection to our motherland.
What is Ethiopia for Africa and also for the whole Black world?
Again, it's that symbolic state that, first of all, Ethiopia was never colonized. They were occupied, but not colonized. So that was always a very inspirational aspect of Ethiopia. The fact that, again, as we said, the whole continent was Ethiopia. But when the colonizers came in, they divided, made lines, named countries after themselves or after other. And it was just a thing where we just looked at the whole continent is still Ethiopia, but there still managed to be an Ethiopia on the continent. So that's why Ethiopia, the country, became very important, not only because of the spirituality, the Orthodox Christianity, because that was proof that their stories about Christ was a lie. You know, when we saw Ethiopians were some of the first Christians in the world, then we understood that what they were telling us, that Christianity was a white man's religion and that they were civilizing us with this concept, we understood that was a lie, that Ethiopia had Christianity and Islam and other religions before they came to the West. But they made us feel as if we were godless, uncivilized people. So Ethiopia, just by existing, made us understand that, no, we have a rich history, that we are the first Christians, that we have this connection with ancient Israel and with the Muslims of antiquity. Ethiopia has those connections historically. It's not something we made up. You can look in and see the history. It's connected. Like Moses came to Ethiopia. Jesus came to Ethiopia. You know what I'm saying? These are realities. You can look in the Bible, you can look through history, you can see these things actually took place. You know, Aksum was one of the greatest civilizations on the continent. But we weren't taught these things. We were taught that we were brought from Africa to civilize us, to make us human beings. But we were already human beings. So Ethiopia, for us, pointed out what we already had and how they've deceived us about our intrinsic nature. So all of those things, that's what became why Ethiopia was so important to Black people all over the world, not just in the US and Jamaica and the Caribbean, but Central and South America, parts of Africa like Nigeria and South Africa. They built Ethiopian churches. They connected with that idea of Ethiopianism. So this is something that touched all of the world, not just a small segment, not just the Jamaicans. Mm-hmm. It was all African peoples of the diaspora.
As we all know, starting from 1960, most African countries are free from European colony. But are we free? That means most scholars keep saying there is an indirect colony in Africa.
Well, it's very difficult because we understand the importance of Africa, and Africa being free and united would be a powerhouse on the stage of world affairs. So many of the countries that originally colonized Africa, they're not going to just give up their interests and their investment just because Africans are demanding that we need to be self-determined and that we need to be self-sufficient. They're not going to give up. They may give lip service to that, but the actual fact is on the ground. We see that many of the so-called leaders are in the pocket of these European and Western, these corporations, the ones that control the resources. It should be benefiting the people on the land, but it's these people that get rich.
Let's get back to you. You were telling me about your magazine project like that. What are you doing currently here in Ethiopia?
I'm going to be starting writing for a magazine called Sheba. It's a new magazine, so we'll be publishing starting in January. It's art and entertainment, business, tourism, just positive news from Ethiopia, things that are good about Ethiopia. It's my way of taking part in media, actually doing these things too. It's my way of, because I'm trained in the media, so I feel like I have the ability to communicate some of these things that are good and positive about Ethiopia, because the imbalance is we're getting so much negative news. We get so much news about these people don't like each other, these people are at war, but in the midst of that, there's a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of unity that goes on the ground level that people don't see. So we want to shine a light on some of these things on our community here in Ethiopia, which is a lot larger than some people realize. The diasporan community, the Rastafarian community in particular, how we're not just from Jamaica, although everybody identifies Jamaica, and the Jamaicans were some of the first Rastafarians to come and settle in Shashamani. And we always big up the pioneers, but even before the Jamaicans came in the 60s, Rabbi Arnold Ford came in 1930, he was from Barbados and spent time in Harlem and New York. His wife, Mignon Innes Ford, started the first school for girls here in Addis. David Talbot started the first English newspaper here in Addis. So there's been a lot of Africans from the diaspora, African Americans, Jamaicans, people from Barbados and other South America, Central America, who have come to Ethiopia, again, since the time of Menelik. One of the first people that came was a brother named William Ellis. He wanted to start a bank to connect African Americans and Ethiopians with a bank, an international bank. Of course, his efforts were thwarted by, the then Secretary of State from the US. When he found out this black guy was coming and doing business with Menelik, he started talking bad about this guy to Menelik. So it made Menelik say, okay, boy, maybe I shouldn't give him all of what he wants. But these things were done deliberately to discredit and to make our efforts look like, okay, he's just a con man. He doesn't have any, but he was a millionaire, self-made man. He came to Ethiopia with real intentions, but again, because of the politics of the time, they decided, okay, we don't want a black man running a bank in Ethiopia. So his efforts were stopped. But these things have been attempted over the years. So this is from Menelik's time. And then, as I mentioned, during Haile Selassie's time, Colonel Robinson came with his planes. And then after the war, he brought Tuskegee Airmen to train pilots and mechanics. That's why Ethiopian Airlines is the #1 airline in Ethiopia, not only just in Ethiopia, but on the continent, because they had this participation from African Americans from that time. And these African American pilots couldn't find a job in America. After the war, it's still segregated in America. So they couldn't find jobs at Pan Am or any of these major airline companies that were starting post-World War II. They couldn't get jobs. Those jobs are only available to white people. So they came to Ethiopia, some of them 6 months at a time, to train pilots and to train mechanics. So these things, we always have that will and that desire to be part of Ethiopia. It's just a matter of just, having the support of our government and being able to give. We haven't had that in a real way. Have not had it. It's mostly us individuals, we come on our own and we give our contribution and we do what it is we can do.
As you told me, you are a Rastafarian.
I am.
You guys have a big love and respect for Emperor Haile Selassie. Tell me about that.
Well, again, just the significance of in 1930 when he was crowned. Even before that, we'll go back to 1924. As Rastafari, he went to Europe and entered Ethiopia into the League of Nations. So that was very big. You know, black people in America saw this on newsreels. When you go to the theater, you would see a newsreel of news that was happening in the world. And they showed, you know, this Ethiopian monarch traveling Europe and his entourage. And they were colorfully dressed. They were obviously black people. You know, these things were exciting for African Americans to see on the screen because now this gave it legitimacy. You can see it for yourself. That's an African ruler. Now, in 1924, traveling the world, people bowing to him. And, you know, this is big things. And so when his coronation took place in 1930, the whole world came to Addis Ababa. The first color edition of National Geographic was Coronation Days in Addis Ababa. You know, so even looking at those pictures from the National Geographic, the spirituality of the whole ceremony, the significance, again, of black people and the coronation, the titles being so biblical, all of these things, you know, converged to seeing Haile Selassie as a divine figure. I mean, it was like he was sent for the redemption of black people, not just mentally and physically, but also spiritually. So that's why and then, you know, he's the father of Africa United. He was the driving force behind the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union. So all of these things that he brought to the table are things that we were mindful of watching on the stage of world affairs before the audience of world opinion. These things took place. This is history. His address before the League of Nations in 1936 was prophetic. He told Europe, you have struck the match in Africa, but it will burn Europe. So he sent troops into Poland. He sent people into Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And the League of Nations did nothing because they did nothing before for Haile Selassie's situation. But again, like people, grassroots people wanted to go and fight for Ethiopia. When we were forbidden to fight for Ethiopia, not saying it was right, but they went to Italian neighborhoods and broke windows and, you know, because it was just that frustration. We wanted to go fight for Ethiopia. Why are these Italians coming to take over Ethiopia? You know, is it revenge for Adwa? What's going on? So we were actively involved emotionally, spiritually from that time. And looking at these events taking place, it would appear, again, that because Haile Selassie was on the throne, that all these governments conspired against him. Sure.
Who's your favorite singer from Ethiopian musicians?
You know, I love Teddy Afro. I like Betty G. I like a lot of different singers. I mean, there's so much music. I like Jono Band. There's a lot of musicians that I've worked with in my time in Ethiopia and that I admire what they do. Gash Ahmed is one of to me, when I saw him on stage, how he controlled the crowd and it was so many different people. It was young and it was old and everybody was singing along with him. I thought that was amazing. You know, so there's a lot of artists I love here in Ethiopia. I mean, I can't pinpoint anyone, but I have to say Teddy Afro is probably one of my favorites.
Mr. Itemiti, my next question is, what is your future plan here in Ethiopia?
Wow. You know, my future is, you know, I'm 63 this year. I just turned 63. So right now, my main goal is I want to put together some of my poems to publish in a book, just to make available to, you know, a lot of people have asked about my poetry being available in book form. So I want to put that together. I also want to continue doing some of the media work that I've been doing as far as voiceover, narration, and also long range plan is maybe have a podcast or a radio show again on YouTube or something like that. But right now, I'm focusing on typing up my poems, putting them together for a volume of poetry, maybe 2 volumes. I have a lot of poetry that I've been writing over the years. So I want to put them together into some books that people will be able to purchase. And
you did many shows on the Fundika, right?
We have a group, a collective called Poetic Saturdays that we perform. We used to perform at Fendika, but now we were performing at Guakon in Haile. And we also have a publishing arm too, so it'll probably be on the Poetic Saturdays publishing unit that I'll publish the poems. And I think we'll have some Amharic translation of some of the poems too. So that's our immediate future plan. Hopefully we can get that together, but that's what I'm working on right now.
Now, 2 things happen when you fall into a hole. The first is you become acutely and immediately aware of the power of the law of gravity. What also happens simultaneously is time slows down. And I found myself contemplating some serious and urgent questions. They were 1, 2, 3. How deep is this hole? How deep is this hole? How far down does this hole go? What's at the bottom of this hole? Is there water 6 feet deep? Or things that might impale my feet? Is it rocks or mud or doo-doo? Or bodies of others who fell in this hole? So I landed at the bottom of this hole. I felt and made sure my knees and my ankles and my feet were uninjured, my hips and my back. Then I looked up, wondering, how do I get out of this hole?
We talked about the Western media's propaganda about Ethiopia. And so what Ethiopia should do to resist this media propaganda?
Again, like I was saying before, so some of the main thing is just to become more media savvy. Like understand that just because you see it on the news doesn't make it true. That you have to look for balanced presentations. So if you see one particular thing that's on one extreme, look for the other and then try to find the commonality, the meeting in the middle between the two. Because usually the 2 extremes are both erroneous in their own way. You know, so the best thing is to find the middle ground and find exactly what's going on for yourself. That's the thing that we always, as Rastafarians, you know, you have to find out the truth for yourself. You can't depend on somebody else telling you. That's why, you know, people can say, oh, this or that. But unless you actually do the research, the prayer, the investigation, whatever it is that you need to do to find out more about that issue, that's what we need to do. You know, just be more informed, broader in outlook. Just look at things on a different point, from different points of view, not just the one point of view that's being presented by CNN or by Al Jazeera, but look at some other news sources. You know, there are other news sources available, and then from here in Ethiopia, and then you have to look at the 2 extremes and try to find a balance. That's to me what good journalism is. So if anybody wants to practice good journalism, you find a balance. You can't just take the first story that you hear. Even that's one of the first things you learn in investigative journalism in school, is that you have to develop sources that verify what you're trying to prove or find out. And just because you hear something as a rumor and maybe 3 people verify that rumor, that doesn't make it true. That just makes it a widely popular rumor. So these things you have to understand. The dynamics of oral culture. You know, some people don't read. Some people only listen to what people tell them. Some people don't listen to international perspectives. They only listen to the homegrown perspective. You know what I'm saying? And then some of them are deceived because people in the US, just because they speak Amharic doesn't mean they represent the Ethiopian on the ground's issues or interests. You know, this person is in the US and he has his agenda. So you have to look at what is these people's agenda? What are they trying to accomplish by putting this particular point of view across? Again, doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It just, you have to understand that, okay, these people have this particular point of view because they have this agenda. And maybe other people with another agenda have another point of view. So the thing is to look at all the different points of view and understand for yourself what your point of view is. Not just to take what somebody says and going with that. Because, you know, some people are targeted that way. They get stirred emotionally. Somebody says, you have to feel it this way because this is what's happening to us. But that necessarily isn't true. It could be something that's exacerbated, again, from outside interests. Somebody's being paid some money. So now it's their interest to get you on their side because that's how they get their money. So these are things we have to understand. Who are these people who are promoting and saying this particular point of view? And why? You have to ask yourself these questions. Again, it's not any disrespect to anybody. It's just being honest. In journalism, you have to look at the whole, like all the different sides, not just one side, not just the loudest voice. So that's
interesting. We are finishing our show. So as you know, Ethiopia is under pressure, which came from the Western sides. We are in a hard situation. What is your message for the Ethiopian people on the unity part, especially?
Again, as we said, you know, unity is always the accepted goal, and we can differ on strategy. We can differ on all the various semantics surrounding how do we achieve that unity. But the bottom line is we have to understand that unity is the accepted goal. So my point of view is I really would like, and I pray for Ethiopia and Ethiopians to not accept the point of view that's from outside of Ethiopia, that we are divided on tribal lines, that we're divided on regional lines, that even though some people are keeping that idea alive, not all Ethiopians think that way, especially here in Addis Ababa. In Addis Ababa, I know many families that are combined, the tribes, intermarriage. From Menelik's time, they've had Oromo, Tigray, Amhara in their family. So it's not fair to ask these people now they have to divide themselves on tribal lines. That's totally unfair. And even some of the people who are declaring themselves Tigray, they have Amhara in their family. Some of the people are declaring themselves Oromo, they have Tigray and Amhara in their family, or Walaita, or Ethiopia is a huge country, come on. So we have to resist this narrative that we are different because we come from different tribes or different regions. You know, again, it just might be just a difference in the way you pour your coffee, but it's not a big difference. You know, we have to understand that. Again, it's not, I'm not naive enough to believe that it's going to happen overnight. But this is our fervent and sincere prayer for Ethiopia. This is what I pray for African America. This is what I pray for Jamaica, for Brazil, for all of these places where you find struggle between people who look like each other. And then the people who are benefiting don't look like us. That's the point I want us to really understand. It's an old African saying, but I repeat this. When two brothers fight each other, then somebody else from outside is going to take the inheritance. So brothers should not be fighting brothers, ever. Sisters should not be fighting sisters, especially over superficial things like tribe. And deep down, we're all Ethiopians. And not just, again, in this country, but the whole continent. That's, again, how we see it. And not only the continent, but everybody who's descended from this continent. We are all Ethiopians. And if we were to unite as Ethiopians internationally, we would be a powerhouse. We have more people than China. We have more people than Russia and US and all of these places. We would control if we were to unite economically and culturally and those things. Again, we can allow people to have their own religion and their own culture. That's no cause to fight each other.
Mr. Itemity
Yes,
Green,
sir.
thank you for being in my show.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. I really want to say thank you for being with us. I will see you next time with other program. Have a good time.